Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. Today, I want to just break down the fatty acids, the fatty acid composition, and the more popular oils and fats that we use and see in our foods, see in the processed foods, and use in restaurants. Really as a follow up to last month's episode, where I went through some of the studies and the effects of linoleic acid, the studies backing those up as far as how they drive disease in our bodies. And really, it was focused primarily on metabolic disease more than anything else. But there's several studies showing more than that, many more diseases than that, but specifically linoleic acid's connection to metabolic disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. And again, the studies back those up. So if you want to see those, go to the last month's episode. But I'm also going to get into not only the percentage of linoleic acid, but as well as the saturated and monounsaturated fatty acid percentages. Since we know that we primarily store fat as saturated and monounsaturated fats, and any polyunsaturated fat or PUFA fat in our bodies is a result of our consumption from our diet. So it would make sense to consume fats that are most likely or most like our own fat composition, particularly when it comes to PUFA and specifically linoleic acid, which is, again, driving disease. So go back and check out that episode if that's something of interest to you to hear those studies. It's called Studies Support Processed PUFAs Drive Metabolic Disease. I know, sounds odd, but that's the last episode title. So check that out for July 1st. Now, we have data from previous studies, 1 to 59. There's other studies showing that human adipose tissue is approximately 55 to 60% monounsaturated fat, 30 to 35% saturated fat, and about 10% polyunsaturated fat, with about 9% of that polyunsaturated, or 9% being PUFA of the PUFA, I shouldn't say it like that, 90% of the PUFA really being linoleic acid. So of that 10% that's polyunsaturated, 9 of that 10% is linoleic acid, the omega-6 linoleic acid, and 1% was omega-3. So again, 55, 60% monounsaturated in our bodies, 30 to 35%. Some you might find some studies that show 40% saturated and closer to 55% monounsaturated, and then 5 to 10% poly, depending on what you're looking at. Of course, we know that the amount of linoleic acid from looking at these studies had increased to approximately 21% by 2008. That's the linoleic acid in our adipose tissue in our bodies, which means that we're storing less monounsaturated fat as well. If linoleic acid is going up, the mono and the saturated fats are coming down. I think most seem to be coming off the saturated fats, but that's not the point. Is our body composition is changing based on our diet of the last 120 years or so, 110 years. The levels of PUFA in humans, say before the introduction of the processed PUFA oils into our food system about 100 years ago, which was 1910 when they started putting out cottonseed oil labeled Crisco. So let's say we went back to the mid 1800s. It was believed our adipose tissue, human adipose tissue, even the US, was believed to be about 3 to 6% PUFA, and the rest being a fairly close split, but more so monounsaturated and saturated fats stored in our body. And this is consistent with the levels of polyunsaturated fat in the body fat of modern indigenous cultures like Maasai or other cultures, whether South Pacific or somewhere in South America. But basically cultures or groups where they don't consume a modern diet full of processed food, right? A westernized diet. And which, again, their saturated fat would be higher, closer to 35%, maybe the 40, because they have a lot less PUFA. The PUFA might be half, would be half of what it was in 1959, so it might be more like 4 to 6% PUFA. So again, check the studies in the last podcast for reference, but I'm going to start with the oils, just get right into these oils with the Hateful Eight. And this is just, like, again, an add-on reference specific to the types of fats, because I usually have to put something out like what I did last month, and questions like, what about this oil? What about that oil? So let's get into it. So you understand the risk and what to look for. You can make your own decision, assess your own risk, and decide what you want to use based on the breakdown of the fatty acids in these fats. So soybean, so let's start with the Hateful Eight. Again, soybean is 54% linoleic acid. Ooh, big red flag there. 54% linoleic acid, 23% monounsaturated fat, 15% saturated fat. Canola, big, real popular one, 21% linoleic acid, 61% monounsaturated fat, and 7% saturated. So that's what makes it pretty popular and called a healthy one, because it has so much monounsaturated fat, but they're overlooking or basically underplaying the effect of linoleic acid, because the mainstream doesn't really see linoleic acid as a problem. And they also see that it's a higher omega-3 concentration, which I didn't mention before. 11% of the fatty acid profile for canola is omega-3, which everyone raves about. It's still have double the omega-6 in the linoleic acid. But they're all worried about low saturated fat, high monounsaturated fat, and then the poly is another 32% total combined omega-3, omega-6. Not and again, it's because they're excited about it. They're not recognizing the negative effects of linoleic acid. And you'll see that some of these percentages, most of these percentages of oils and fats I'm going through, I may not mention the omega-3 at all because it's non-existent, or it's like maybe less than 3%. Some of it's less than 2 or 1% omega-3. So it's not really worth mentioning. But let's go move on to safflower oil. There's 2 types of safflower oil on the market. Traditional safflower oil, natural, typical safflower oil, is about 76% linoleic acid, 12% monounsaturated fat, 9% saturated fat. There's a modified safflower oil out there, which you may see. It would be probably labeled modified, or may have a little asterisk next to it, which is only 14% linoleic acid, still kind of high, 77% monounsaturated, and 8% saturated fat. And that's why it's modified, to have more monounsaturated fat, to be more healthy, right? Because we're just looking at, from their point of view, not us, but their point of view, oh, it has more monounsaturated fat, it's got to be better for us. Completely ignoring the fact that it still has a significant amount of linoleic acid in it, because that's, again, not recognizing the harm from the abundance of linoleic acid already in our diet. Sunflower oil, 71% linoleic acid, 16% monounsaturated fat, 12% saturated. Corn oil, 57% linoleic acid, 29% mono, 13% saturated fat. Cottonseed, old Crisco, 54% linoleic acid, 19% monounsaturated fat, 27% saturated fat, which is why it's solid at room temperature. So it's a saturated fat. Plus they hydrogenate a lot of those polys as well. They hydrogenate them, basically adding the oxygen, or the hydrogen molecule, or atom, to make them more solid, to make them more shelf stable. But it really makes them worse, doesn't it? Yes, was it turned into a trans fat. Grapeseed oil, you don't see it too often, except for maybe some of the so-called healthier, they call themselves healthier processed foods. But grapeseed oil, it's marketed as healthy. 70% linoleic acid, so I wouldn't consider it healthy at all. 16% monounsaturated fat, 10% saturated fat. They're excited about that monounsaturated fat. Rice bran oil, 30% linoleic acid, 38% monounsaturated, 25% saturated. Fairly even mix. Still lots of linoleic acid. So it doesn't matter how much good stuff you put in there. As far as more monounsaturated fat, that's great. If you don't reduce the toxic linoleic acid enough, you're really not, I say put in there. What they emphasize, or if they modify like the safflower oil, doesn't matter if you're putting good stuff in your body. That's what I'm talking about. If you're still putting crap in, the good stuff you're putting in is not going to outweigh the crap. You got to get rid of the crap. You got to get rid of the toxins. Let your body heal itself, right? We have to get out of our body's way. Okay, let's get to a little better choices as we see them. Olive oil, 9% linoleic acid. So at least we're in the single digits there. 75% monounsaturated fat, 15% saturated. This is the big to-do over olive oil, 75% monounsaturated fat. Avocado is right behind it, 12% linoleic acid, still double digit, but low double digit. 70% monounsaturated fat, 50% saturated fat. Some people like putting olive oil and avocado oil if you're still eating veggies on your veggies or cooking with it. You just need to recognize the risk. 12% linoleic acid in avocado oil, and 70% mono. I certainly wouldn't use it at high heat, and I'd minimize the use of it because we're all really wanting to minimize the amount of linoleic acid coming to our bodies. We probably already have too much of it from the processed food we ate growing up, just living in a Western society, especially living in the US, before we started paying attention to the dangers of these oils, linoleic acid. So even though it's not coming from the hateful eight, you're still getting it, and you want to reduce sources as much as possible, right? Lard, 9% linoleic acid, much like olive oil, but only 47% monounsaturated, 43% saturated. So that's why it's solid. In most cases, it's a little, room temperature. You get summertime, it might have a little liquid in it. And that is, one, make sure if you're looking for lard, try to get the stuff that's not hydrogenated. Try to get actually just rendered lard, maybe from a butcher, not the real packaged stuff you'll find in your grocery store. It might often be hydrogenated lard, so they've taken some of the monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat and hydrogenated them. So you probably got some trans in there, possibly. It's just not ideal. If you can find a pastured lard, I can't tell you what those ratios would look like, but I would imagine they might have less linoleic acid. So in other words, pigs that have not been stuck in a pen all the time, but they're actually grazing and foraging in an open area, you call it pasture or forest or whatever, they have those pigs allowed to roam free, but they're looking for their own food and they're not being fed corn and soy and garbage, basically, byproducts. Then your linoleic acid percentage might actually be reduced from that 9%, so a lower single digit. Still, in my opinion, better than what we've looked at so far in the other oils, except for, competitive with olive oil. And that is with olive oil, here's the thing which we're learning more and more, or seeing more and more of. Many olive oils, even the ones that say extra virgin on them, have been diluted in the packaging process when they're bottling them or canning them, whatever they're putting them into. They're being diluted with soybean oil to save the manufacturers money. Well, so you're not actually getting 100% olive oil, but they're selling you 100% olive oil on the label. So it's hard to find out which ones. Avocado, it does the same thing. They definitely dilute avocado oil with soybean oil. So be careful about, do some research if you're going to buy those oils about what your sources are and if they're diluting those oils from the manufacturer. So here we go to the favorites here. Tallow, 3% linoleic acid. Well, that's more consistent with what we want to be in our bodies, isn't it? 3% linoleic acid, 45% monosaturated fat, 45% saturated fat. Sounds ideal. Butter, 3% linoleic acid, 28% monosaturated fat, 68% saturated fat. Not bad. Not bad. That's great. The big point is, I mean, I don't know that the ratios of mono and saturated are as important to us. They certainly aren't as important to us as a low linoleic acid. I don't think our bodies are too impacted by that ratio of mono to saturated. I don't know, but they're far less important. The ratios between those two, between mono unsaturated fats and saturated fats, is far less important than having a low linoleic acid, which is what we want, a low percentage, low single digits. Coconut oil, 2% linoleic acid, 7% monounsaturated fat, 91% saturated fat, which of course scares the mainstream with a 91% saturated fat. Oh my gosh, it's worse than beef. Think so? So, I mean, I used that for a long time. It just may not have as many, coconut oil may not have as many micronutrients as, say, butter or tallow. But you're definitely avoiding linoleic acid, which I think is, again, more important to avoid the toxin than to try to add something else, another nutrient or something like that, to the fat. So 2-3% range, you're good. Those three would probably be, your ideal choices: tallow, butter, and coconut oil. Palm oil, which I don't know too many people using that in the US, but they might be used more in Asia or maybe some restaurants, but 10% linoleic acid, 39% monosaturated fat, 51% saturated fat. Again, getting a bad rap from mainstream because of the 51% saturated fat. Peanut oil, 33% linoleic acid, 48% monosaturated fat, 19% saturated fat. 33% linoleic acid is high. That's a high one. Flaxseed, big fits. When I get a question about, people are using this as a supplement. There's so much cooking with it, but they're using it as a supplement. 16% linoleic acid. That's a little on the high side. 18% monosaturated fat, 9% saturated. Well, they've got some low percentages there across the way. Why? Across all three of those, because 55 to 57%, give or take, of flaxseed fatty acids are omega-3s. And so they really promote this as an omega-3 source, that plant-based, of course. So to get more omega-3s, then supplement with flaxseed. How about we just reduce the omega-6 instead of chasing a plant-based omega-3, which I think we'd be better off with an animal-based, to be honest. Sesame oil, another one people like to cook with for the flavor. 42 to 48% linoleic acid. That's pretty high. 35 to 42-ish% monounsaturated fat, and less than 20% saturated fat in general. Chia, another one people take for, like, maybe put on a salad or take it as an omega-3 source. That's a very high amount of omega-3. The linoleic acid is at 20%. The monosaturated fat is at 10%. Saturated fat's at 10%. So there's like 60% of it is omega-3s. Like flaxseed, it's considered an omega-3 source, and that's why it's considered healthy. But 20% linoleic acid is just, it's more than I would want to consciously put in my body. Especially as a supplement. I could think of better supplements. So if we look at the ideal human adipose tissue, which, like I said, was about 35-ish% saturated, maybe 55-60% monosaturated, and low single digits, say 3 to 6% polyunsaturated fat, with maybe half of that being linoleic acid, so 2 or 3% linoleic acid. When we want to eat the fats most similar to our own body fat composition, like, again, tallow, butter, and coconut, which have the lowest linoleic acid, which, in my opinion, reinforces the fact that beef is an ideal food for us, because the fat, like tallow, right, it's the same fat that's going to be in beef, is ideal for its composition, most like ours, as well as the nutrient density, as well as the nutrients that are actually in the animal fat. And butter's similar. Butter, yes, has a higher saturated fat composition, but I mean nutrients, right? D and E. So you're looking at again choosing these because they are more identical to what we're putting in our body, since, as we saw in the last episode, the polyunsaturated fat levels in our body, we can't create polyunsaturated fat. We store fat as saturated or monosaturated. Do not store it as polyunsaturated fat. That comes strictly from our diet. So if it's increased from 1960 from 9% to 2008, 21% on average in the US, it's because of our diet, because of these oils, putting more linoleic acid into our system. And it's accumulating, and once it accumulates in your tissues, the more it accumulates, I should say, the more susceptible to disease you are. Whereas if we can keep it in the low to mid single digits, it doesn't seem to cause a problem with lifestyle disease. Now, coconut oil, may not have the micronutrients, has a good fat profile though. Again, let's keep the main thing. Let's keep linoleic acid out. If you prefer coconut oil or to use it, great. If you want to get super picky and get those micronutrients everywhere you can, tallow and butter. But coconut oils is great because, again, linoleic acid creates the greatest risk of disease. With right behind these three, lard, 9% linoleic acid, 47% mono, and 43% saturated. Yeah, very close to our body fat composition from the study in 1959, isn't it? Very similar. And again, that linoleic acid may be lower if you find some pastured pigs lard, but it's a fairly even split between mono and saturated. Olive oil, again, the 90% linoleic acid, 75% mono, 50% saturated. So again, and be careful to make sure you're not getting something that's been diluted with soybean oil. For that reason alone, it might be a reason for you to avoid it. If you can't figure out which ones have been diluted and which ones are pure, I mean, if they're putting soybean oil in the olive oil, that's a big hazard. That's a major hazard. That's one of the worst oils to have put in your body. So avocado oil being the next in line with 12% linoleic acid. But again, remember, they're diluting that oil too. I think I saw 40%. I saw something about 40% of avocado oils are being diluted with soybean oil. That's significant. So do some research, and if you can't find anything on it, I'd avoid it. And we also know that saturated or solid fats at room temperature are more stable or resistant to oxidation, right? So if you're cooking and adding heat, you want a more stable fat to resist oxidation under that heat while you're cooking. So saturated is the way to go. But again, make your choice based on your own risk to benefit ratio for you. Try to keep linoleic acid in single digits for fats used by you, realizing that every restaurant is using soybean oil or a similar oil. Many, if not all, of the meal services out there, we order a prepared meal, right? They're using canola or maybe safflower or sunflower, maybe even soybean. And most processed foods, including the salad dressings with a healthy olive oil looking kind of, marketing label, right? Name brand on the label, will have soybean oil or canola or something else in there to add filler, add oil to it. So just because it says olive oil, you can have a percentage of olive oil to add flavor, and then they probably diluted it with soybean or canola oil. It doesn't matter if they're organic. You're going to see organic safflower oil, organic canola oil. That just means they have been added to toxins like herbicides, or pesticides to it. That doesn't affect the linoleic acid concentration in these oils. Now, if it's a prepared food of any kind, it's probably got one of the hateful eight in there, any kind of processed food, prepped food, right? So ideally, what's the answer? A little more work on our part. Ideally, we need to be eating whole food prepared at home with the preferred fats that we've chosen. Ideally, like we mentioned, tallow, the butter, the coconut oil, lard, some olive oil here and there, if you find some that's pure. But you know, that's knowing, because the reality is most of us living in, you know, Western society, we're not going to be able to avoid linoleic acid completely. We are going to eat at a restaurant now and then. We are probably going to consume some type of processed food or consume food at someone's house that's been prepared in a way that we wouldn't prepare it. It's just going to happen. And before our awareness of this, we were eating it, many of us, for several years. We were eating these foods and consuming this fat for several years. So we might have had an accumulation of it in our body, and we're trying to reduce it, which can take some time. What we don't need to do is to keep consuming it in high levels, right? It's impossible to completely avoid, but we can certainly reduce our risk or exposure by focusing on, you know, using other fats and avoiding the processed foods and restaurant food and prepped meals and things like that as much as possible. But it's almost impossible to avoid it. So when we're trying to bring down our exposure and reduce how much is stored in our body fat, we might have to go a little more, be more diligent about it, be more aware. Spend a little more time avoiding it, preparing food ahead of time. Make sure we're not having to eat out at a restaurant or, you know, for lunch or for travel if we don't have to. You know, so it just takes a little more effort, but it's, you know, I would think worth it to avoid the linoleic acid that is pervasive now in our food system. So I hope you find this helpful, short, sweet, and put it to work for you. You know, whatever you do, get rid of the stuff that's in your pantry, in your home, with these toxic oils, and, you know, spend some time figuring out what you can do to incorporate the better fats into your own cooking, and spending more time cooking your own food. If that means, you know, to take for lunches, to eat before you meet friends out, to go out to dinner, or so you can minimize your exposure as much as possible. Yeah, it's almost impossible to avoid them completely. But there are things we can do. A little extra effort to minimize exposure can really go a long way. If you didn't hear last month's episode again, you know, it has the studies in there. It has a handful of studies. I've linked to them in the show notes that you can check out for yourself about the risks associated with risk to disease associated with linoleic acid in the diet. Have a great week.